So my name's Abigail, and I did an undergraduate degree in biomedical sciences, and then applied to do grad med, and got into Warwick my first attempt. And then I am currently in my second year now at Warwick Medical School.
Perfect. So I guess starting off from the beginning of your application, obviously Warwick is known for their intensive work experience that you need to have. Yeah. So what work experience did you undertake throughout your time?
So I'd always been interested in medicine, so I'd done a lot of stuff as I kind of hit sixth form and was during my undergrad degree, but it wasn't really until my last year of my undergrad degree that I really kind of committed to medicine. I'd kind of just decided that I wasn't, if I hadn't been good enough the first time, what was the point? But I did an internship in my second year of uni with NHS Voices, which is it's basically like a massive survey in palliative care. So I worked for an NHS trust in London, and I basically, with other people, put together a massive survey that went out to families post a death, and asking about the palliative care and what we could do to improve it in the trust. And I spoke to families about what we could do to improve it, and then worked with those trusts to put better practices in place. So that was a big chunk of my work experience. And then I also worked ironically, I worked at a theme park as a first aider. So I spent, most of my free time when I wasn't at uni working, giving medical care to people.
That's amazing. How so obviously you successfully got into Warwick, but how do you felt that helped you in your application? Did you find the work experience of, say, that I think the cap is it 70 hours?
Yes.
So how did you find that benefited you?
So they ask for 70 hours, but 20 of them can be shadowing. The other 50 have to be practical. Okay. So it has to be you physically hands on a patient. And I submitted my work experience, and obviously until recently, because of COVID, you weren't allowed things like St John's, and because obviously there's no proof of how many hours you do. But I really fought my corner. They kind of came back to me and were a bit on the fence about whether, my job was enough. Yeah. And I turned around and was like, well, I can list you patients that I've treated and things I've done. I can show you, paperwork that proves I saw this patient, and I think that's a big part of it. You've really got to, if you think you've got a piece of work experience that is going to make you look good and make you a better doctor, which is ultimately what they're looking for. They're not looking for people with the most experience. They're looking for people that have done things that are going to make them good doctors.
Yeah.
And if you prove your point and you push for it and say, actually, I don't agree with you, I really do think that this is a good piece of work experience, and this is what I've learned, they do take it.
I guess from their point of view, looking at it face value, if you had a job as a first aider, but how many people needed first aid? But obviously, they don't see the patient interaction that you had on a day-to-day basis.
Exactly.
Which would have been presumably a profound experience that you could have put forward. Obviously, you're having that hands-on experience every day. Yeah. So I totally agree with that.
And I think the lesson I learned, I've spoken to a lot of people about this, is that they'll say no for the first time, but just because they've said no doesn't mean they won't take it. I know people that have submitted work, so Warwick obviously have a 3-year period that you have to have done the experience within, but I spoke to people that submitted information from outside of those 3 years, and the university rejected it, and they went back and were like, actually, I don't agree with you, because whilst it's outside of your 3 years, I learnt more in that 3 years,
Yeah.
Before that has actually made me, I will be a better doctor because of this. And they then turned around and they were like, okay, we'll take it. And they got in and they're thriving now.
Yeah, totally agree. I mean, with your application, obviously you must have sat the UCAT. How did you set any other admission tests?
No.
No.
So I made a conscious decision to just take one.
Yeah.
Because obviously grad med is competitive enough as it is. And I had always thought about medicine. But never been good enough. I didn't have the A-level grades for it. And I'd kind of written it off until I got into, it was September of my third year of my undergrad, and we were having personal tutor meetings. And during my personal tutor meeting, my tutor asked me, what did I want to do? And I couldn't answer the question. So he said, what are you going to do after with your degree? And I couldn't answer the question. And I think he could tell that, like, I wanted to say something, but I didn't want to tell him. And eventually he got it out of me that I'd always wanted to be a doctor. But obviously, it didn't work. And he said, why not grad med? Like, what's the worst that can happen if you don't apply? And within about 24 hours, I booked in to take the UK CAT and just gone, you know what, I'm going to do it.
Yeah, I guess, especially personally, in my whole heart at uni, we're at that critical stage at the moment where we're waiting for that point of where we make it real. We submit. I guess the point where you go and apply for the admissions test is where that's it. It's real at that point. Yes, it's all good me getting the work experience of talking to you and the 9 other people previous or doing my work experience at the hospital, but it's, I guess, when it becomes real is when you know you've got this exam to meet. And unfortunately the UCAT is a very bottlenecked exam. People get cut off, like there's been cut-offs of like 3,000 for undergraduates this year. It's
because so many people take it.
That's it. I mean, how did you find the UCAT? Did you find it well? Or?
There's areas of it. Abstract reasoning, it got to there was a point where I just learnt the basics and the more simple patterns that would come up, and then almost just took it out of my brain, because I was getting so bogged down by not doing very well in that area that I wasn't doing well in all the other sections. Yeah. And I do think it's a tricky one, and I think that a lot of people start too early and burn out.
Yeah.
And when UK CAT, there's not a lot of resources, or UCAT I think it's called now. There's not a lot of resources around for it, and I do think that people go and spend loads of money on courses and things that don't teach you anything you can't learn yourself. And I'm president of a widening participation society. So our job is, we aim to get as many people as we can into medical school that ordinarily wouldn't. And we're very passionate that you should never go to anything that wants money from you.
You're not the first person that said that, and probably not the last. I mean, there's playing the devil's advocate. There is resources like Medify. If you've taken the UK CAT, you've probably heard of Medify, and that is like a prime example of something that can teach you how to answer the exams on the day. Like it's like a replica, but again, do you need it?
You shouldn't. You shouldn't need it, and it's not about learning the answers to the questions. The UK CAT is designed to make sure you know techniques that you're going to need in medical school. So you're going to know logical reasoning. You're going to know how to problem solve. So you need to learn to sit the UK CAT. You need to learn the technique, but you can't just learn someone else's technique, because it's not going to work for you. I had to learn my own techniques in how to get through the abstract reasoning, and there'll be websites and blogs and people will show you videos of how to work through them, but you've got to find your own that clicks for you. And it's the same with every section, and you can go and do courses and you can do every single practice question under the sun and get them all wrong or learn the answers to them, but unless you've got the technique right, you're going to sit in that test centre and you're going to stare at a question you hate and not know how to work your way through it. And those are the people they're looking to weed out.
Yeah, I guess a good follow-up question to that would be what sort of resources did you find helped you the most during the revision?
So I use the website, go to the place that knows how it's going to be marked.
Yeah.
Step one. And then I use the books, the two, the questions books.
Is that the ISE?
That one.
Yeah.
And in all honesty, I spent 2 weeks on it, and that was it.
Okay.
That was all I did. The 2 weeks before the exam, for the first week, I spent maybe 2 hours a day on it, just figuring out which one was my best one and which one needed more work, and getting to grips with the style, because obviously I'd done a degree, so at this point it wasn't really the style of exam I was used to anymore. And then I spent the second week, I'd probably do a couple of, I wouldn't say more than 5 hours a day, and that was on a good day, just questions and practice getting the technique down. And sometimes I do the same questions over and over again, because it was about getting the technique of how to sit there and go, this is the question, what's the first step, what's the second step. And that was it.
I mean, I've heard multiple people explain it as the UCAT is almost a sprint, whilst the GAMSAT is a marathon. So I mean,
and the same with the BMAT to an extent, yeah.
It has worked for you. Like, obviously you're here now, so it was successful.
It's ironic that you go to a theory test centre to sit this 90% of the time, because it's very much like doing your driving theory test. It's not a long term, like, it's not information you absorb and you retain for the long term. And I see people on Instagram, and I get a lot of people that reach out to me and say, oh, I'm going to take the exam in 6 months and I'm just starting. And it's like, put the book down, close it down, put it away. If you want to do something about it 6 months in advance, then practice your times table, or read, get your language skills up. Don't spend 6 months on the questions and the technique, because it's not going to do anything. It's some people it might, there's the odd few, but it is very much a sprint and not a marathon. And you'll burn out, and you'll get bored of it, and you'll start to get lazy with the questions, and that's why people do so much work and then don't get the grades they think they deserve for the amount of work they put in.
Yeah, so it's almost getting your background knowledge solidified before you actually start learning techniques. As you said, get proficient at reading fast, get your timetables up to scratch, and then it's almost having the toolkit to approach the actual technique of the exam.
There was some irony in so I lived at home for my undergrad, and at the same time I was prepping to sit my UK CAT. My sisters, who are 10 years younger than me, were learning their times tables. So there was times table CDs playing in the evening so they could learn their times tables, and I was relearning them, and it was great. But yeah, it's very much about the basics before you do the questions.
Totally agree. So I guess moving on to your interview stage at Warwick, is Warwick the only university that you got an interview at, or?
No, so I interviewed at King's as well.
At King's as well.
Yeah.
So I guess they're both Mmi Style interviews. So how did you find the Mmi Style?
I like it. I had somebody explain it to me as, instead of being able to introduce yourself to somebody once, you get to introduce yourself to them 9, 12, 15 times. So if you make a mistake with one, you've not ruined the whole thing.
Yeah.
Which I thought was a very good way of thinking about it. It's a tricky one, because it's not about the answering of the questions. It's not about being right. It's about how you think things through and how you portray yourself, and how, if you're visibly having a breakdown over not knowing the answers right, how you get through that as a person, rather than are you saying the world's best perfect answer to the question.
Yeah, I guess it's the process that you're going through behind the question, rather than, I guess you as you said, you're explaining a question.
They don't They don't want 2 minutes of silence and then a 10-second perfect answer. They want 2 minutes and 10 seconds of you explaining how you're going to get to that answer, and then saying, based on all of that, this is what I think the answer is.
Yeah. Go on, sorry, go on.
I'm just going to say, ultimately, you could say the exact wrong thing, but as long as you'd explained your reasoning for getting there, and that it had been a logical process of you getting there, you'd probably get more marks than somebody that said nothing for 30 seconds and then came out with an answer.
Yeah, completely agree. I guess, did you do any preparation for the interviews?
Yeah, so the same people that do the UK CAT question book, they also do an MMI book. And I got one of those mainly for the the ethics questions and the how the NHS questions, mainly for those rather than for the explain this picture to somebody that can't see the picture question stations. I mainly got it for those because those are the kind of questions where you do have to kind of make sure you know the right thing to say.
Yeah, totally. I guess you need to know the background knowledge of the job you're ultimately going to go into. Hence, that'd be like the history of the NHS or current situations that the NHS is in.
Yeah, more than I think more current situations than history of the NHS. They are very much into the current affairs, from my experience anyway, and from some of the MMI sessions that we run. We've always found that if we offer current, issues in the NHS, they always do seem to pop up because they're things that aren't repeated every year, and therefore, people can't learn the answers very well. People can't hear from a medical student that got in the year before and say, well, they asked this question about the history of the NHS and these are the 5 most important things to say.
Yeah.
So they very much like the current affairs in the wider healthcare system.
Yeah, I guess you had two interviews, so you have much more knowledge than the average medical student, really. What do you think went well during the interviews, and is there anything now looking back you thought you could have improved on?
I think it's a really tricky way to question to answer because they don't give you feedback, and it's very hard to come out of an interview and so, for example, you come out of an interview and you think it's gone one way, and then you obviously get an answer. So I came out of my King's interview and thought that actually it had gone quite well, but then obviously King's is incredibly competitive, and then wasn't given an offer. And then that's when you start looking back on it and reflecting on how well you did. And then because you've not got a positive outlook, you just see the negatives.
Yeah.
But I do think the best thing that I did in those situations is that I always took a really deep breath before I even started talking. So I'd introduce myself, sit down, they'd ask the question, and I'd literally just breathe. Like, the first thing you do is breathe, because otherwise you just shoot a load of information out.
Yeah.
And you've not lowered your heart rate, you've not, absorbed the information they've given you. And I think if you don't absorb the question before you even start to think about the question, you're going to answer the wrong thing.
That was going to be my next follow up of it's all good and well you knowing the perfect answer to your personal statement, but if you're not answering the question that they're asking, that answer doesn't mean anything to them.
Yeah.
So I totally agree. You need to. It sounds so basic, but so many people trip on it.
Yeah.
Answer the question that they're asking.
And always, I had quite a few stations that were very much about name this experience that might have changed your perception of becoming a doctor. And I'd think of something. I'd start to kind of put the context into the situation, explain the situation, but then I always made a real conscious effort to then round it back to the question and get the actual keywords from that question in the final sentence. So so this situation made me feel like this, and I felt like I couldn't be or didn't want to be a doctor anymore because.
Yeah.
And I think if you make that conscious effort of getting the key words in the last sentence of whatever you're saying to somebody, even if you've waffled for 2 of your 5 minutes, you'll still get, you've still gotten to the point, and therefore you've ticked their boxes.
I guess it shows that you're almost being critical about what you're thinking, and you're coming to that conclusion ultimately. Yeah, I guess the tricky part about the MMIs for most people is the role play situations you get put into. So how did you find them? Did you find them particularly tricky?
So from memory, I don't think I had a role play at my King's interview, but I did have one at my Warwick interview. And I completely agree, it's the most awkward thing you've ever done in your life. I remember reading the note on the door that we were going into a GP surgery as medical students to take a history, but not obviously a proper official one, from a patient that's in there. And I remember walking in, and it was an actor, and just going in the back of my head, oh my god, 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 like, this is awful. Like, I'm about to introduce myself as a medical student, but I'm not even here yet at that level, and I don't know anything about taking a history, but I have to now find out what this human being is here for. And it's the most awkward thing you'll ever come across in your life, but it's only awkward if you make it awkward. You can be having an absolute meltdown inside about how awful you think you're doing and how awkward this feels, but ultimately the person you're sat in front of is an actor, and therefore they're just going to read what comes out of your mouth and act it back accordingly. And they know you're nervous, and they know that you're not actually medical students, so there's no need to sit there and go, oh, I'm not a medical student, so I can't pretend I'm a medical student. Realistically, if you succeed in this interview, in 6 months' time, you're going to be doing this as a medical student. So fake it till you make it, because we've done more scenarios since then. We do them as medical students, and I've done it with the exact same actor, a very similar scenario, and I hate them. I hate going into them and sitting there, but the moment you start and you just keep going and faking it till you make it, you always come out of it, and they think better of you for getting through that awkward situation.
I guess it's plain in your mind of that you're not a medical student, and even if you don't know how to take a basic history, if you fake it and you show that you're confident and you're actually trying to, then it shows that you're actively trying to participate in the interview. If you're sat there having a meltdown saying, oh, I don't know how to take history, then I guess, unfortunately, it's that competitive, then they're just going to go, well, there's 10 people behind you that actively tried to take history.
But they're also looking for people that know where their boundaries are. You might get a simulated patient that then asks you medical information that even if you were a medical student, you wouldn't be allowed to give out because you are just the student. So it's about, they also want people to say, oh, I'm a medical student, I really can't give out that information, but I can pass your concerns on to the doctor and they can get back to you. They're looking for people that know where their professional scope is. And actually responding like that, rather than trying to make up something that you might say if you were a doctor, but you don't know 100% about that condition. They don't want people like that, because if you were in the real life scenario, you get in severe trouble for that, because you're giving information out that you're not qualified to give. So turning around and saying, I can't give this information out to you, but I can pass it on to somebody that can, is 100 times better than just pretending you know what you're talking about.
I completely agree. I guess it's just trying to get you to apply the knowledge that you have. Obviously, you might not have that knowledge, but trying to adapt to that situation as best as possible.
Yeah.
I totally agree. So I guess obviously you've been at Warwick, it's 3 years now. So unfortunately you're nearing the end. But
So I've had quite a strange medical school experience. So I actually sat the first year twice.
okay.
So I have about 2.5 years left now. And it's so if anyone wants to know about the first year at Warwick, I'm very much overqualified. In that extent, and it's hard. And grad med is hard because they expect you. They almost hold you to a higher standard, even though you probably know somewhat less than someone doing undergrad medicine would, because they've had longer and more time to do the same amount of information.
Okay.
But ultimately, grad med, you'll find that grad med doctors are more on it in foundation years and more on it in the future because they've had to work so much harder to get to it.
Yeah. So I guess is a perfect follow-up to the question of looking back now, is there anything you wish you would have known before you began your degree as a med student?
I think I'd have just liked to have. I think I'd have just liked to have known myself better. Okay. And I think that was a big part of why I struggled in my first year, the first time, because it's a massive culture shock. It's not like any undergrad degree you'll ever do. Your first year of grad med, it's just not, because you're playing catch up. The Warwick grad med first year is 9 months of 9 to 5 lectures, Monday to Friday. Yeah, which sounds awful, and it's quite frankly, it's a little bit awful. But it's 9 months of 2 years worth of an undergrad degree.
Totally, yeah.
So it's condensed information, and it does hurt. And you do come home, and you're like, it's like working a job and then coming home and studying a night class.
Yeah.
And I think I crumbled a little bit due to the pressure because I wasn't secure enough in my own confidence that I could do it. And that was the one thing that changed between the first year I sat it and the second year I sat it, was that actually, whilst panicking a little bit that I wasn't going to do very well, I knew that I could learn this information.
Yeah, I guess just to touch on how did you find the adaptation from your undergrad to graduate entry medicine? Did you find it, obviously most undergraduate degrees go into a lot of depth, and as you probably realise, graduate entry medicine is broad rather than depth. So how did you find adapting to that?
I think for me it was less about getting very deep into the information and more about knowing when and where to stop.
Yeah.
So you get these, you get your slides and you've done your lecture and you've kind of gotten an idea of what they want from you, but then you feel like in order to I was going deeper and deeper in order trying to understand it and trying to understand why this happened in the ATP cycle or why this medical condition caused this symptom. And it was very much like, right now you just need to know that this causes this. Yeah. And it's about knowing where to stop. And I think that's why a lot of med students in grad med do burn out a little bit in their first year, because rather than just stick with the box that the university gives you in order to make sure you've all got the same base knowledge, which is ultimately what the first year of grad med is, it's about making sure that everyone is on the same level playing field for the next years, and everyone is competent enough in that basic information that they can now throw a load of clinical stuff at you. And going too deep too early is sometimes the worst thing you can do.
Yeah,
So stick to those learning objectives and stick to what they set you. And if you go any deeper than that, you need to only go deeper if you've got time, brain space, and it's actually going to be relevant to you in the exam, because you've then got 3 years of clinical time where you can do that extra reading and extra learning if you need to.
Yeah, so you said you had 2 years of year one. So obviously it's probably a unique situation. How did they approach that? Is it do you just get to like resit the year? Or...
Yeah. So I failed the final year exam by 2 marks.
That's...
And with Warwick, unless you have mitigating circumstances, if you fail the first year exam, you aren't competent, and therefore you are asked to leave, basically. So I was very fortunate that I had some mitigation in place, and I was able to come back and resit the year. You resit the whole year with Warwick, because you have to do all of the bits within that year in order to be fit to sit the final exam.
Understood.
Yeah, and to be honest, whilst it was a little bit miserable because it was all the same content, I will be forever grateful that I've had the opportunity to do it, because I've learned so much more about myself and about how to do medicine as a medical student, and I'm probably more secure on that content than a lot of other people in my cohort now.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, if that's a career path that you want to go down to, it doesn't matter if you take the long road or the short road. That's a destination where everybody is ultimately going to end up at. And as you said previously, you are going to be more consolidated on the core information. It's most likely a lot more than a normal undergraduate study. It's combined. So I totally agree with that. In terms of, obviously, your time at medical school, is there any particular myths or like misconceptions that are stigmatized within?
I think there's quite a few, to be honest. I think there's always a lot of stigma around the financing side, about how we get no money, and and I do think that puts a lot of people off. But whilst there is that small, you do have to pay so with Warwick we pay the equivalent of the first term of fees. So it's about, I think it's £3,500 at the moment, and then student finance fund you the rest. But you also get a maintenance loan, which is, if you're under, and actually you can live off it. It's not, pittance.
Yeah.
And then from second year onwards, we get so it's a subsidised maintenance loan. So I think it's like £2,000, £3,000, depending on whether you're under 25 or whatever.
Yeah.
And then you get NHS bursary, which is also means tested, but also part of it's a grant. So there's definitely enough money. And I work 2 jobs while studying. Yeah. And it'll be 3 in January, because we're helping out with COVID vaccines. But it's like you said earlier, like if you want to do it, you'll find a way.
Yeah.
Like I found a way to study medicine, and it was, I work as a resident tutor on campus, which means I get subsidised accommodation, so I can afford to live up here and study. I work a job that is casual hours, so I can pick and choose my hours, but it's also, so I work as an event medic, so I work at rugby games and clubs and things like that, improving my clinical skills, but also earning me some money.
Yeah.
But yeah, if you want to do it, you will do it. You will resit the year, even though it's going to make you miserable, and you will, live off beans and bread and potatoes and walk everywhere, and because ultimately we want to be doctors. And if you wanted to do anything else, or you didn't want to do it enough, you wouldn't be here and you wouldn't have put all that effort in to get here.
Of course, I that's what you just said. If you work two jobs is unheard of. I've heard of, so a bit of context. I was very surprised at the amount of graduates that actually go and study the 5-year course and actually self-fund it with a job. I've never heard of a graduate entry have two jobs though, so that's I gotta give props.
And I think it's learning the balance of how to do it. Like, I'm very fortunate that one of my jobs is casual, so I try to plan it very cleverly. Of, this period of the year isn't very hectic in terms of learning, or it's very far away from the exam, whereas this period of time is very close to the exam, so I'm not going to work here. Or, I might only work 1 shift or 2 shifts that month, so that there's a bit of something the next month, but, I'm not wasting time.
Yeah.
And it's just the reality of medicine. And, I say I work 2 jobs. One of my job is to live in a building with all these undergraduate students and make sure they behave themselves, which, but yeah, you do what you want to do to get here. I know people that work in Tesco in the evenings and nights stacking shelves because they need money, and it's flexible around their placement hours. Whereas I also know people that don't work because they took 2, 3, 4, 5 years off before they applied to medicine and just worked full time.
Yeah, totally. I mean, obviously, you've come from an undergraduate degree, so I like to ask a question of how do you find the competitiveness? Obviously, as you probably realise, undergraduate degrees very competitive. Everybody's fighting for that 70% and above, and unfortunately, they can't give that to everybody because then it wouldn't be classed as a first. So, how do you feel coming from an undergraduate? How do you feel that's changed in terms of graduate entry?
So there's always a running joke about people just wanting to be satisfactory. So with Warwick, they grade your papers, instead of it being pass or fail, it's satisfactory or not satisfactory.
Right.
And I also think it shocks people when they hear where the grade boundaries sit for exams. So Warwick first year paper, the average grade boundary is 55 to 65%.
Right.
And this year, so for the first year paper, it was about 55, 56% was the pass mark.
That is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it's based on how hard the paper is. So it's 55% because the paper's harder than a 65% paper.
So I'm guessing they grade it off the cohort of students who sit the paper, and they take like a certain percentage, or is it the percentage set before the students?
Yeah, so it's nothing to do with so the GMC will say that the paper has to be of a certain weight of hardness, which is about 55 to 65%, and then the pass mark for the paper is based on the questions themselves. So they pull questions from a question bank, and then based on how hard that question is, it's given a percentage. So if it's a very hard question, it will be a 55% question, and then they put a question paper together, and then they average the questions, and the average percentage of those questions is the pass mark for a paper. So it's not even based on the people you're around. It's everyone, and there are years that have done it where a whole cohort has passed the paper, because it's not about you versus everyone else. It's about how much do you know.
Yeah, I think, well, a few people have said that it's more of a teamwork. There's a lot more teamwork, and you get to know your cohort a lot better. Instead of competing against your cohort, you're all working together to ultimately pass.
Yeah, definitely. And, I've been in 2 cohorts for the first year, which is for, Warwick is considered the hardest year. And I've been in a cohort of people that are really calm and really chill and very much about us all getting to the end and us all getting through it. And I've been in a cohort of people that have been a lot more high stress and high, pressure, and everybody wants to kind of almost, very much like an undergrad. and it was very much about who could be the best and who could do the. And ultimately, I think that the more success has been in the year that have been a bit more chill and about, we'll all work together to make sure we've all got the right information, and we'll all, pitch in. And I've seen more success in that group of people than I've seen in the other. But equally, they'll all make great doctors and they'll all get there. But it's about how easy it is to get there. And I personally feel that if you work together as a group and you pick a group of friends and a group of colleagues that have the same frame of mind of you of, we're all going to get through this, we've just got to get to the end of that paper, you'll do so much better, and mentally you'll do so much better.
Yeah, so I guess we've slightly touched on the subject, but what keeps you motivated for such an intense course, like especially with 2 jobs as well?
I find that whenever I go and do a clinical placement, whether it's an afternoon and bedside teaching or shadowing, an MDT, so a multidisciplinary teams meeting, I come out of them excited. And I find that at work as well. If I go to work and I do a clinical work shift and I've seen something that's related to what I've studied and I've been able to do something about it, I get quite excited. And you start to feel like you're almost a doctor, and I find that motivates me. And I've also got a lovely group of friends who, shake you when you haven't left your desk in a week, or remind you that the outside world exists. And I think that works really well to motivate you into keeping going. And, rather than looking 4 years down the line of, I'm going to be a doctor, I try to think, 6 months down the line or 6 weeks down the line of, I'll get to the end of this block in 6 weeks, so I need to do everything I can to get to that 6-week period. Or, there's this thing I want to do in January, but in order to do that thing in January, I need to have done all of this work. So let's keep going.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, ultimately, that fire is going to keep, that candle is going to keep lit. Like, even though you're going through these stressful exam periods, you're still going to have those moments where you have that patient contact, or you diagnose this patient correctly, and that's what keeps that candle lit at the end of the day. Especially with like myself, like every time I speak to somebody like yourself, it just it gives you, it re-sparks that fire of, right, I need to get motivated, Joe, to move forward. So I can totally agree where that motivation and that passion stems from.
Yeah, everyone has their own personal reason for wanting to be a doctor. There's surrounded by the general reason of we want to care for people, we want to, we want to problem solve. We're all a little bit nosy. We can all say we're not, but we're all a little nosy. But ultimately, everyone has that personal reason deep down of why they want to be doctors. And it's that personal reason that when you're really burnt out and you're like, I can't do this, or what's the point? Like I've not properly seen my relatives in maybe 6 months properly because of everything, because of workload and COVID, but it's worth it for the long term because of the personal reasons that I want to be a doctor, mixed in with that feeling when you go and do something clinically and you succeed, and you just become like, it's like pins and needles, and you just tingle, and you walk out of it and you might be knackered, but you've got a smile on your face and you can't get rid of it.
Yeah.
And you're like, yeah, it's kind of worth it.
Yeah, totally agree. I guess on the contrary to my previous question, with such a long and strenuous course, how do you find the time to plan for like rest and self-care?
I'm not very good at that. So, I think it's a tricky one. You have to kind of know when to stop and when not to punish yourself for not studying. There's a really big thing within medics where we punish ourselves mentally for not studying when we think we should be studying, when we're going out for dinner with somebody, or we've taken a day off and not moved off the sofa, or we've gone to, I know people that are prepping for exams in the year above me who are panicking because they're like, oh, but I'm going to take 5 days off for Christmas, the 2 days before, the 2 days after. But then I've wasted 5 days, and it's like, no, you're not wasting time. If anything, you're building yourself up in all the other areas that will make you able to study. There is absolutely nothing wrong with taking a break, and there is absolutely nothing wrong with, finding that gap of, time where you then go, right, I'm going to go on holiday. And then everyone goes, why are you going on holiday in the middle, because I want to go on holiday, because I need to not be in Warwick and I need to go somewhere else and pretend I'm not a medical student for 4 days. And it's completely allowed. And, if it wasn't allowed, the university wouldn't give you 10 days annual leave, and they wouldn't give us holidays, and they wouldn't give us, Wednesday afternoons off to do sporting events and sports fixtures. They want you to do things that aren't medicine. They actively encourage you to do things that aren't medicine. Because if you just do medicine, you will burn out, and then you'll become exhausted, and you won't be able to do it, and you won't get to the end of the course, and you won't, medicine is one of the careers where we have the highest rate of people giving up medicine and going, to office jobs or teaching, because they burn out, because they break, because they don't learn within medical school how to take time for yourself, and that it's okay to work Monday to Friday and then take the weekend off sometimes.
Yeah, I guess with Warwick specifically, is there many opportunities for sports, extracurriculars? Obviously, it's almost a designated medical school, so there is.
We always joke that we're both on campus and not involved in campus at all, because Gibbet Hill's just up the hill. There's not really anyone up there. But within the SU, there is the MedSoc, and within the MedSoc we have a load of sports teams and a load of extracurriculars. There's craft clubs, there's yoga, there's rugby, there's netball, hockey. You name it, we've probably got it. And the university in the first year, knowing how difficult it is, do give us protected Wednesday afternoons. So we have protected time to go and do something that's not medicine. Within the week, let alone within your weekend, and they encourage you to do things that aren't just medicine. And it's good for you to do things that aren't just medicine, because your foundation applications in the future, I know that's a long time ahead for people that are just applying, but they don't, it's the same with applications. They don't just want you to be just like tunnel vision medicine. They want you to have a life and to be a well-rounded person.
Yeah, I guess a few people have said work medicine around your life, not your life around medicine, if that makes sense. Because ultimately, as you said, the medicine's the highest dropout rate because of people burning out. I guess just to follow from that is, what does a typical week in the life at Warwick look like as a medical student?
So, you thinking more first year or where I am now?
Just as like a progression from first year to.
So first year is the heaviest. So it is most of the time. So it's 9 to 5, Monday to Friday. So it's obviously changed a little bit at the moment because of COVID.
Yeah.
But the general structure would be 9 to 5 on a Monday. So you'd have a morning of lectures, then you'd have CBL in the afternoon. Tuesday, you'd have 9 to 5 lectures. Wednesday, you'd have CBL in the morning, and maybe possibly a lecture or like a seminar, and then you've got the whole afternoon off. Thursday, 9 to 5. Usually that was quite the painful day with the back to front, because that was usually a full day of lectures.
Okay.
And then Friday we would have our hospital day. So we would go in to the teaching hospital. It usually started about 8 o'clock, which was quite a difficult one on a Friday.
Yeah.
But it's done so that, because the parking in the hospital is hard, so they purposely schedule it earlier in the morning so that we get in early, so we beat the car parking rush. So it's not to be evil. It's done with our sanity in mind. So we had an hour lecture in the morning that was usually anatomy based, and then the day would rotate. You either did anatomy, looking at our plasternet models in the morning, or you did that in the afternoon, or you did clinical skills, so practicing examinations and taking histories from simulated patients or from each other, and you kind of interchange those based on what groups you were in.
And how does it progress onto second year? Do you find that it becomes more clinical based and less like theory based?
So second year is more clinical based. So you do 10 weeks, they call it AC1, so it's advanced cases 1. It's 10 weeks of a mixture of lectures of kind of like the heart, building on what you've done in first year, but in a more clinical, so you're looking at conditions now rather than the science. And that's intermingled with 2 days of trust hospital teaching. So we have bedside teaching, we shadow pharmacists, we spend an afternoon in A&E. So learning how a hospital works, how the processes work. You follow a patient from A&E to X-ray and back, and to outpatients, and see how the journey works. And you do that for 10 weeks, and then we have a transition week. So we then spend a week in the hospital. And then from then on, it's 10 weeks of rotations. So between 10 weeks of medicine, and then 10 weeks of surgery, and then 10 weeks of specialities.
Okay.
Yeah, so it's quite much more medicine. And that was what got me through first year, when I was really, I'd gone straight from sixth form to undergrad to medicine, and I was very much over education in that sense of, sitting in a lecture did not fulfill me in any way, shape or form, because I'd done it and I was a bit over it. But it was getting into clinical, into that clinical, time that was really a motivator. And actually, I've seen a change in myself towards medicine in the last, I think we're 3 weeks in now. Because of COVID, it got shifted. And I've got friends that have said you can just tell that, like, it's like a massive weight off your shoulders when you start doing medicine rather than learning medicine.
Yeah. So I had Abigail, sorry, not Abigail, Abby. Yeah, I had Abby on last week, and she said the exact same thing as you. Is the best way to learn medicine is to actually do it, rather than just you can sit in a lecture, as you said, but it's almost applying that knowledge of medicine being so-called, it's very stereotypical, but an art, and you need to practice that art to actually be good at it.
And it does even link back to the learning stages of, you have to do it to learn it. So you have to go into an anatomy session with a plasternet and not just stand there and stare at it. You have to be like, right, I'm going to do this, this and this and this with it. And you're going to go into you're going to go home and you're going to revise something. And instead of just copying your notes out or typing them up, you're going to get a piece of paper and you're going to draw it out, or you're going to write a mind map out to link it all together. And you're going to, draw anatomy diagrams out to learn how heart valves work or things like that. Medicine is a very much doing, it's didactic, and I think that's a lot of the time the struggle for people, especially if you've got people that aren't a non-science, that aren't used to doing things with their hands in order to learn, the process. That's definitely the key to success with medicine.
So I guess, what's your vision going into the future then? Where do you see yourself?
Oh, that's a tricky one. A doctor, touch some wood somewhere.
Yeah.
No, I'm currently looking into kind of acute medicine, A&E, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Just based on work experience and kind of the pace of medicine there. But equally, I try to go into everything with a very open mind. Of I want to do all my placements before I make a decision. I want to learn how everything works and how all the different specialities work before I make a decision. And I think that's how everyone should be going into medicine. There's no point in applying to medical school because you want and deciding the day you get your acceptance letter that you're going to be a neurosurgeon in XYZ at this specific hospital doing these specific procedures, because you might end up on a gastro ward and fall in love with it, but you've spent your whole medicine career narrowing yourself into a field.
Yeah, I guess that's the whole reason of having your foundation years, and you learning different aspects of the NHS before you actually commit. Well, it's committing your life to one specific. So it is very big decision. And everybody I've spoken to has decided on one thing and then ultimately switched to a different speciality. So
many people do.
Yeah.
There's
totally.
So we run a widening participation group at Warwick over a widening access group, because we always say to people that medicine goes beyond applying for it and then just doing medicine. It's about how it's about getting into everything in all the different stages. So it's applications, and then it's what to do during medical school for your foundation program, and then what do you do within your foundation program to get into speciality training, and how do you overcome all the myths and the not knowing enough about it. We find that a lot of people know everything about applying to medicine and how to get into medical school, but then people don't know that you have to take an SJT at the end and a finals and a prescribing exam, and they're about to put another test in now. So there's a new test that's now at the end of the year, which is at the end of final year, which is a national test. So it's a bit like in America how they all sit and examine are ranked.
Yeah.
So there's a new one of those now. And a lot of people don't know that when they apply. And then they don't know that they then have to do another UCAS style application. So they've still got to look good in 4 years' time, even though all they can think about is getting through medicine. And a lot of people don't then think into the future. And so we work really hard to try and teach people medicine isn't just about getting in. It's about longevity, because it's not a job, it's a life.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think the other side to that is people who aren't in the profession only know the application because they're not in there yet. And unfortunately, everybody knows that it is a bottleneck, especially with graduate entry. So they're mostly worried about getting in first due to the competitiveness. But also, I do agree that you should know what you're committing the next 4 years and the rest of your life for. So
and I think, unfortunately, there is still an element of medicine that is very insular, in the sense of you have, if your parents were doctors, you'll probably go to medical school, or if you've got relatives that are doctors, it's easier to get work experience. And we work very hard to try and overcome that. And doing things like this, and you doing things like this, is very much a good way of being like, actually, there are normal people that know nothing about medicine that get into medical school.
that was the whole point of this, is to have different views from yourself to people that have gone to do graduate entry but are now on a undergraduate course, to people who have had parents that have nothing to do with medicine but have found that passion and ultimately success into becoming a doctor.
I'm from a family. My parents, no one in my immediate family went to university. My parents don't have A levels. I'm from a family where it's, where higher education hasn't really been the norm. They go into they do trades, or they do they hit 18 and they've worked, and it's a tricky one, to try and do when you feel like nobody in your family knows what you're trying to achieve.
I can
take vibing.
So I can totally relate with that. I mean, I think that's the case with most people. Most people don't have, especially in the north. Most people were brought up with you get to 18, especially with your parents. You get to 18, and you either follow a trade or you go hands on. Select few get to go to universities. Obviously now, 30, 40 years down the line, it has changed. The stigma has changed with universities, but we're still at that we're still the first generation of students to get that opportunity of mass students applying to unis.
And I think that it's a tricky one, and it's a tricky one to try and explain as a graduate applying to do another degree, to explain that to people. I mean, I didn't tell my family that I'd applied until I got an interview.
Wow.
So I actually told, the day I went to sit the UCAT, the only test centre I could find near me was 80 miles away. And I told my parents that I was going for a job interview for an internship. And I drove 80 miles, and I sat in the car park for an hour, took the UK CAT, and then drove back. And I didn't tell them what I'd done, And then I got 2 rejections through, and I didn't tell anyone. And I got 1 interview, and I still didn't tell anyone. And then I got the 2nd interview, and then I told my parents, and then I told my mum, like, just so you know, I'm gonna stay the night in Coventry on this night because I've got an interview at Warwick Medical School the next day. And that was the first she knew that I'd even done it.
Yeah, I guess personally with myself, they know what they know I'm doing something. I'm talking to med students. They can watch it on YouTube or on the union, but does any of this resonate with them? They hear the first year SJT, the UCAT, but it's almost foreign to them. They have no, and you can, most presumably you can relate. They don't have any experience of what universities are like, how universities operate, so they can't relate with it ultimately.
Yeah, and I do think it creates barriers to applying to medicine, and for example, like student finance, like applying for student finance every year, I have to brace myself to do, because it's tricky, because my parents don't understand it, and trying to explain that I'm applying for money from the government, but I need all of this information. Applying for the NHS bursary was a nightmare because they wanted my siblings' birth certificates, and trying to explain to my mum that I wanted to send my sister's birth certificates off by post to some random thing for something that she didn't really know what was going on was like, it's like, I just need to send them off, and it's tracked, and they'll be back, and then it means I get money, and then I can live, and I don't have to live with beans for 9 months. And it's tricky, and it does, I think, a lot of people, that and the £3,500 that they expect you to hand over, puts a lot of people off.
I guess it's a lot of people don't have that connection between, obviously, as you said, there is that disconnect of, if your parents went to university or if your parents were doctors, then they ultimately know a bit about what universities need. But if your parents, as you said, are in trades, they have no idea. So having that, not only that financial support, but also just having them know what you're going through as well, which is almost, I think, the main barrier. They don't know how much effort you're putting in to a degree. They just think a degree is like anything else. But where does it take you ultimately is the thing I'm trying to get across, that they don't know.
I mean, so all my student finance statements go home to my parents' house, and I can only imagine them opening them up and seeing that I currently owe the government
Yeah.
70 odd £1,000, and I've still got 4 years left, 3 years left. I can imagine them thinking, what the hell is going on? Like, and I think it is really hard to explain to people why you want to do it. And I've had times where my parents have said, is this really worth it? Are you sure this is what you want to do? If you're finding this hard now, are you really going to be happy? Are you going to, you're not going to be earning enough money to doing all that work to be happy. And it's like, well, you have to understand that I'm not just looking for money and a job. I'm looking for fulfillment, and I'm looking to go home at the end of every day and feel like I've achieved something in my life.
Yeah.
And I do think that's sometimes where people struggle, and why people do get downhearted when they don't get in on the first round of applications. And so, I see it quite a lot on social media, and I get messages from people that say, how do you keep going when, I've applied 2-3 times and my UK CAT is never enough, or I don't know what I'm doing wrong in interviews, because I get interviews but I never get an offer. And that's almost the trial. Like, you've got to get through those trials to get into medicine, because otherwise you don't want, how you're not going to want it enough if you're not willing to keep trying. And
That's it. Yeah. That's it. Is if you give up, then where was your motivation in the first place? If this is, as you said, this is the fulfillment that you want throughout the rest of your life, then it's something that you're gonna keep applying. I've had people on here that have been rejected 3-4 times and they've eventually got in. But it's, as you said, it's that trial and error of, if that be getting more work experience, applying for a different way, or getting your UK up to scratch. Ultimately, they're here and they've excelled because that's what they wanted to do at the end of the day. So I guess they are prime. They are prime experiences that they've gone through.
Yeah, and you'll find that the most successful people in medicine will be the people that took the hardest route to get there, because they want it so much more than the people that got it almost handed to them. And I don't mean that in an awful way. Everyone works hard to get into medicine, but some people's journeys into medicine are easier than others. And I do believe that the people that get in and have to resit years, or apply 4 or 5 times, or have to, take leaves of absences, will make better doctors in the long run, because they've had to work so much harder to get there.
Yeah, I totally agree. So I guess just to wrap up for future medical students watching this video, is there any golden pieces of advice you give somebody going through the application process, or even just starting out their first few days as a med student?
I think you've got to explain what you're talking about. You've got to, really show people your thought processes and your understanding of, whatever they're asking for you. And there's a fine line between showing off and showing yourself off. And I do think that a lot of people are scared to show themselves off because they don't want to appear like they're showing off. And you'll do really well if you just breathe, explain yourselves to them, and explain your successes, but explain your failures and explain what you've learned ultimately.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. I guess that comes with anything. If you're confident in what you're saying, then you can act confident. Obviously, you're going to be confident in what you're saying about yourself, but it's coming off arrogant, which is taking the step too far. And that's almost, it is what you said. You want to show yourself off, but not show off in that sense.
I remember sitting in waiting rooms for my MMIs and seeing people who looked like, and I was sat there like shaking internally, being like, oh my god, and these people were sat there like confident as anything, really brazen about, they were here and they'd done all of these things to get before they got here, and I never saw them again. And I never know. I don't know if they went to other unis or anything, but you start to realise that you'll meet people at your interviews that when you get in, and I say when, not if, when you get in, that you don't always see those people again, and it's because they've not learned the fine line between showing off and showing yourself off and of reflecting on when things go wrong. They'll only talk about when things go right or when they've succeeded and done these amazing things, and they don't talk about the times they tried to do something and it didn't work out as intended, but they then learnt this really cool thing about life and themselves and about what it means to be a doctor. And it's those people that get in. It's the people that are willing to learn and reflect on their life.
That's amazing. Yeah, I guess, and finally, for somebody just starting out their first few days at Warwick, what would be your take-home tips that you give them?
Sleep. I think medicine is a massive transition, graduate medicine even more so, because it is such a condensed and speed of learning. And I really would advise that you, especially in the first few weeks, if not months, that you take care of yourself just as much as you try to get the work done, because you don't want to burn out too early, and you want to learn how you're going to cope and succeed in medicine just as much as you need to learn the information they're teaching you.
Yeah.
Because in the long term you'll be successful and you won't burn out. I've seen many people burn out in the weeks before the exam, because they've not learned how to look after themselves as medical students. They've just focused on learning.
Yeah, totally agree. Anyway, again, I'd just like to say a massive thank you for taking the time out of your evening to come and speak to me. I completely agree. It's a Sunday at 7 p.m. So,
Right.
yeah, honestly, it's been amazing to hear your point of view and your perspective. You've really opened my eyes to what experiences you've had and how you've overcome it, and for that you are a real inspiration.
Oh, thank you very much. Well,
Thank you.
I hope that you've gained something from it, and hopefully a lot more people will see that medicine is achievable.
Yeah,
And definitely
totally.
something worth doing.
Totally. So I guess finally, is there any way the viewers can find you online or get in contact with you? Do they have any other questions?
Yep. So I'm on Instagram. If anyone wants to talk to me, or I can send you my email and you can put it on the description of the chat as well.
Be sure. Yeah, I'll be sure to add it below so I can get in contact with you.
But yeah, I'm very open to people messaging me. I read a lot of personal statements, so.
Perfect. Anyway, I'd say thank you again, Abigail.